Well, I think for me, the biggest way that this is going to hurt organizations is that it's going to completely destroy team psychological safety. Now, there is about a mountain of research to back up that psychological safety among your working groups, your teams, and organizations, it is the number one thing that leads to overall success for the organization. So the most famous example of this is Google did like a 2-year study of all the teams working at Google. And of course, there are no like underperforming teams there, one would argue. But what they found is that the high performing teams, the thing that set them apart from every other team was their ability to trust one another, to communicate openly, to have each other's back, to be able to engage in productive conflict. And when you have trainings like this that are coming in with the very specific intention of disrupting team camaraderie, that's what the intention is. You're going and you're confessing all your sins against your coworkers, things you may, and they frankly may have not thought about in years or didn't even take it as an offense. And now all of a sudden you're accused of microaggressions every day. It's going to destroy team camaraderie and thus destroy productivity for the organization. And I almost wonder if that's part of the insidious nature of it. Is like this is their direct attack on capitalism, is to destroy the structures that are benefiting from capitalism. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the exact kind of practical outcome of this stuff, right? And I think another organization, I've been thinking about this a little bit and talking to some friends of mine, including a friend of mine who was a former Army Ranger. I said, the military, right? The American military is one of the biggest organizations in the country. It is very much racially diverse, geographically diverse. And I think you can make an argument that it was actually one of the institutions that was able to integrate people from different backgrounds very successfully, maybe more successfully than anywhere else. Especially in times where there's a draft. So there's kind of no selection bias in the process, more or less. And the military culture, from what I understand talking to folks, is that you want to basically get to know the individual that's standing next to you. And if there are bullets flying towards you, you rely on that person to survive. You develop a bond that is very close and very tight. And the issues of kind of race or class or geography, you might joke about it. It might be kind of part of conversation. But when it comes down to it, you are united in a single mission. And the trust actually has to go up very high because your life depends on this other person. And I think that's a kind of counter model where you have something that takes a totally different tack, where they're saying, we want to kind of move beyond issues of identity and move towards issues of kind of universal camaraderie and brotherhood that brings people together in a common pursuit. Maybe the same kind of thing that's happening at Google. A lot of these tech companies, I'm Seattle, I have a lot of kind of exposure. They're very diverse, people from all over the world. You have a Russian guy and a Pakistani guy and an American guy and a dude from Alabama and a guy from, Shanghai, China. And they're all trying to kind of come together to build these extraordinary products. And I think that you're right in the sense that this stuff can do a lot to undermine team trust, undermine team camaraderie. And it almost is baffling that these companies are adopting this stuff. And I think I've kind of asked why. Why would a company that really knows better, right? The people at Google and Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft, these people know this stuff's garbage. I've talked to these folks at very high levels and they say, oh, we got to do these, this diversity training or this implicit bias testing. It's complete garbage, but I can't say so publicly. Right. And I could never disagree in our internal communication. So I think there's a certain amount of kind of social kind of pressure, social shaming. And then there's the calculation on the behalf of the corporation where, well, we probably won't lose much if we do it. But if we don't do it, there's a potential to be really blown up in the media, blown up in the press, blown up by activists. So I think the solution is really to try to turn the equation a bit differently and try to create a new set of incentives so that people can say, this is bullshit. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to make my employees do the two-fingered clickety-click implicit bias test that is like so kind of it almost feels like a really bad kind of tool designed by elementary school students. I don't know. Have you taken the implicit bias test?
Oh, I did. And it showed me I had no implicit bias, which I then saved to get out of doing any of this trading.
Yeah. But it's like this, like, A, is it internally consistent? I don't know. My sense is it's not internally consistent. And then B, how do you make the leap from clickety clack? I think it's E and I. You click E and I based on pictures and words you see. How do you then make the leap? Does that kind of very limited cognitive test then kind of, can it replicate? Can it be generalized? And then how does it apply to actual human behavior in real life? I mean, I think that the answer is it probably doesn't at all. And and the latest research that I've seen, again, this is not my domain of study. You probably know better than I do, but is that the kind of the short-term and medium-term impact of these things is actually trends negative in a lot of ways. So I really feel like, you know, people are kind of donning the cloak of science, but I think over time this stuff will be reassessed as nothing more than pseudoscience and ideology masquerading as social science.
Well, I hope so too. And, you know, I've done a lot of research on white fragility, and I forced myself to read the book, and I'm now going through the exercise of, I descended into madness in the reading of this book. But now I'm going through and looking at all the sources and really trying to wrap my head around how she put this together, because I want to fight it. I want to come at it very aggressively. There are 2 chapters in the book where the woman literally uses 0 sources. It's just all anecdotal evidence from her own experience. And I mean, the sourcing in the rest of the book is pretty sparse. And I think, you know, there's got to be a point where people wake up and they acknowledge that there is actually no foundational research in psychology or in industrial organizational psychology that I know of that backs this stuff up. And I keep begging for people on Twitter, like, if you have evidence that this stuff works, send it to me. I will do a mea culpa very, very quickly if you can show me that this actually adds up to something material. But I haven't seen that evidence yet, and it doesn't sound like you have either.
Yeah, I haven't, and I tweeted out recently. I saw a kind of headline. I didn't dig into all the notes and the appendices, but I saw the headline. There was a Harvard sociologist who had studied 800 organizations, diversity trainings over the course of 30 years. So this is someone for whom the incentives are probably to think that this is good, kind of the social incentives on campus. He'd studied it for 30 years across 800 companies, and he found that organizations are much better off doing nothing than holding diversity trainings. So, I mean, you know, again, it's one study. I think it's a huge kind of sample size and maybe generalizable, but I think if anything, it really just, you know, casts doubt that this stuff is valuable in any way. And from what I've heard from people who have kind of reported to me on their experience, it's really toxic. And it's not hard to understand why. When you're told, essentially, you are a bad person and within you is this kind of unchangeable evil based on your circumstances at birth, that person is probably not going to like that. It's probably not a very good way to build a kind of camaraderie. It's probably not a good way to kind of bond that person closer to the mission and the team. In fact, it actually is highly alienating. But I think, again, I really don't think that the goal here is to increase organizational capacity or productivity, right? I mean, that's what they say. But I think the real goal is an ideological and political goal. And it's a way where people can essentially kind of purge ideological opponents from the workplace, and then have the organization of whatever kind of public or private stripe that it is work towards political and ideological goals. And I think that's the end game. And I just don't see how you read it in any kind of different conclusion.
No, I totally agree. And I've actually been working on a project on this channel. Do you know the white supremacist organization document that they're using? It's like 6 pages long and lists all the grievances of white supremacy culture at work. Things like we already talked about. Oh, yeah. So what I'm doing on my channel right now is I'm taking it section by section, and I'm actually breaking it down and debunking it. But you know what it is? It's all based on work style. It's all, if you use, like, I use the DISC psychological model when it comes to work style, but if you use that model, you can see very clearly that all of the grievances they have are related to communication style or someone's approach to work. And it's very, very clear when you break it down. And there is absolutely no evidence that assessment or your work style has anything to do with your race or any immutable characteristic that people have. But it sounds sexy. I don't know.
I think too, it's like my real beef with this is that, you know, I mean, I'm a political conservative, right? I'm happy to put that out there. That's where I'm coming from, and it should be clear to everyone. But I mean, even kind of from my political orientation, you have to admit that white supremacy was a foundational problem in the United States. I mean, white supremacy is a true evil. And it's something that is a horrific historical circumstance and ideology. And it's something that animated the worst kind of movements of the 20th century. But at the same time, I think it really trivializes it when you say that showing up for work on time is white supremacy. It's like, what? That's ridiculous. And I think the real unintended harm is not that I think we can all agree. I think almost everyone agrees that, you know, white supremacy is wrong. But what happens when you trivialize it and then you find it kind of subconsciously or implicitly in everything, it really kind of numbs the mind to the true evil of white supremacy, and then makes it so that it almost trivializes that historical experience itself. And I think that's really the shame. I think it actually works counter to the kind of progressive goals of the traditional progressive goals of moving towards greater equality. I found in these documents that the kind of the core goal isn't really equality. The core goal is a new hierarchy based on the kind of identity progressive kind of pyramid that they've established, and it just seems like something that is wrong. And I think that they're using the kind of fear that's associated and the connotations that are associated when you say this is white supremacy or this person is a white supremacist as a kind of cudgel against, you know, kind of good thinking people so that they are fearful of opposing their political ideology. And, you know, I'm glad to see you talking about it. And I try to be, you know, very careful with my words, but also try to be honest about this stuff and tackle it head on. Because I think it's a shame. I think it goes against our best instincts, and I think it will turn our society in a direction that is really ugly and unnecessary.
Oh, here it is. How is this legal? How can I avoid being forced to participate on racist training? I mean, do you think this training is legal from your perspective, Chris?
I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I have I've read a lot of legal documents in my time, and I did a basic look. There's two places where I think this could be illegal. One is the Hatch Act, which bars government employees from essentially relaying political messages or engaging in political activity on the job. But the problem with that is that it's really focused on partisan activity. So you can't say on your work email server, Joe Biden is awesome, vote for Joe Biden. That's prohibited. But they've ruled, the kind of administrators have ruled that if you say Black Lives Matter, that's political, but it's not partisan activity. So it's allowed under the Hatch Act. So probably not there. There is the Civil Rights Act, though. And I think that there's a possibility. Again, I've been reaching out to kind of legal scholars, some of whom don't want to touch this because it's quite risky. But I've been reaching out to folks to get a better understanding of the Civil Rights Act that prevents kind of race-based discrimination, that prevents unequal treatment on the basis of those protected categories, including race. So I think there's probably a good argument there. I think that's probably the strongest place. And I mean, what it's going to take, though, is it's going to take a person that is employed that's willing to risk kind of the kind of condemnation of their colleagues and the backlash and kind of intimidation and retaliation to actually file a lawsuit and go through the courts. But you know what I think I'm going to do in the near term that is kind of a fun project is I'm going to file a civil rights complaint against the Office of Civil Rights for the city of Seattle and see where that goes. Try to have them answer some hard questions. Try to see their justification for race-based segregation. Try to see their justification for race essentialism, and try to see their justification for a number of the kind of programs and practices that they've put in place. that might be something that could spark another kind of moment, another moment of scrutiny and attention. And then I'm working with a number of my whistleblowers to actually file official complaints with the Office of the Special Counsel and other federal agencies. So that's going to be also something that's going to get deployed in the coming weeks. So, I found that, I'm in a great position where I can do journalism, but I also, as a kind of a think tanker, I have a bit more latitude where I can actually put some of this stuff into action. So it'll be a kind of a fun project in the coming months to try to take action on some of this stuff and try to say, how do you justify this? How is this legal? How does this not violate your own civil rights policies? And at the very least, put these people in an uncomfortable position and let them know that they're being watched, that they're being monitored, that someone is going to hold them accountable. Because again, I had hundreds and hundreds of people say, I want to speak out, but I'm scared. I'm scared I'm going to lose my job. I'm scared I'm going to get my, vandalized. I'm scared that I'm going to be a pariah at work. I'm scared that the office of inclusion is going to, ruin my career. And I really feel like it's kind of a responsibility that I have to speak out on behalf of those people.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. And guys, make sure you're following Chris on Twitter. That's where you usually put this stuff, right? Is Twitter right now?
Yeah, Twitter is kind of the first line. And then if it takes off and I have some time, I'll format it into an article for City Journal or the New York Post.